Dead America, Tales from Las Vegas, The Push North, by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. The morning sun poked through the windows of the office portion of the warehouse compound, casting long shadows across the carpet. Captain Foster stood by one of them, nursing a sip of coffee and watching the sun rise above the horizon. The liquid was still hot, the bitter taste cutting through the fog of another short night of sleep. He looked towards one of the ladders resting against the gate a few yards away. One of the civilians they had pulled from the gym watched the street below, his silhouette dark against the brightening sky. The man shifted position occasionally, scanning left and right with the rifle they had given him. The captain didn't expect there to be much to watch since they blocked off the side streets with cars, but he didn't want to take any chances. Not after everything they'd been through to secure this place. The compound was quiet at this hour, most of the survivors still sleeping in their plastic shed homes in the warehouse. Foster could hear the hum of the cooling units running, keeping the desert heat at bay. It was peaceful in a way that felt foreign now, like something from before. He took another sip of coffee, savoring the moment. Footsteps approached from behind, breaking the silence. Foster turned to see Private Cooper walking towards him with purpose, his boots moving quickly across the floor. The young soldier had a notebook tucked under one arm, his expression focused. "Morning, Cap," Cooper said. Foster gave him a nod, noting the energy in his step. "Morning, Cooper. You look like you're moving with purpose," Foster said. Cooper stopped beside him, flipping open the notebook to reveal pages of handwritten notes and inventory numbers. The writing was small and cramped, covering nearly every line. "Lots to get done today. Spent half the night going through the inventory logs to find what I needed to grab for Connor's group. Now, I just need to pull everything," Cooper explained. Foster raised an eyebrow, impressed by the initiative. He'd asked Cooper to handle the supply run for Connor's neighborhood, but hadn't expected the private to lose sleep over it. "I take it we have plenty to spare of what you're handing over?" Foster asked. Cooper nodded, his finger tracing down one of the lists in his notebook. "Yeah, my thinking was to keep twice of whatever we think we might need, and everything else is expendable," Cooper said. The logic was sound, the kind of practical thinking Foster appreciated. They needed to help other groups survive, but not at the expense of their own people. Finding that balance was crucial. "I can live with those numbers. I want you to stay behind today and get that stuff prepped," Foster said. Cooper's expression shifted to confusion, his brow furrowing. He looked up from the notebook, meeting Foster's eyes. "Captain, you don't want me going to the station with you?" Cooper asked. Foster took another sip of coffee, choosing his words carefully. He knew Cooper would want to be part of the team heading north, but this was more important. "It's on the north side of town, and most likely going to take a couple of days before we get back. I need someone back here who I know can handle whatever comes up," Foster explained. Cooper thought about it for a moment, his posture straightening slightly. The private was young, still proving himself with every mission, but Foster had seen how he handled pressure, how he kept his head when things went bad. That was worth more than another gun on this run. Cooper nodded appreciatively at the compliment. He knew he was just a private, so having the captain think that highly of him was welcome. A small smile crossed his face. "I'll make sure everything goes smoothly, Cap," Cooper said. Foster gave him a solid nod, confident in his choice. "I know you will, Cooper," Foster replied. Before they could continue, Foster's cell phone began ringing. The sound cut through the quiet morning, loud in the stillness of the office. He pulled it from his pocket, looking at the caller ID. Mike's name appeared on the screen, right on schedule. The DJ had a knack for calling at exactly the right moments. "I gotta take this. Go do what you need to do and let the others know it's almost showtime," Foster said. Cooper nodded and walked off, his boots padding quietly on the carpet as he headed toward the warehouse section. Foster watched him go for a moment, then brought the phone to his ear and answered. "Morning, Mike. How are things down at the station today?" Foster asked. Mike's voice came through, carrying that familiar radio quality even over the phone line, but there was exhaustion underneath it, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights. "Well, I inadvertently hit the repeat button when I turned in last night, so I've spent the last 10 minutes apologizing to my listeners for playing the same track 77 times in a row," Mike said. Foster couldn't help but chuckle at the mental image of Mike scrambling to explain his mistake to whatever listeners were still tuned in. The DJ had been running the station solo since this whole thing started, bound to make some mistakes. "Here's hoping it was at least a good tune," Foster said. Mike let out a tired laugh on the other end, the sound hollow. "Even the best tune sounds like fingernails on a chalkboard when you hear it 70-some-odd times in a row," Mike replied. Foster let out a bit of a laugh, shaking his head. He could only imagine the torture of having to listen to that, let alone apologize for it on air. "No doubt, Mike," Foster said. There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling in the background. Mike was probably surrounded by maps and notes, planning out their route. "So are you and your team planning on coming up today?" Mike asked. Foster looked out the window again, watching the sun climb higher. They were burning daylight already, and the journey ahead was long. "We are indeed, Mike. We have a care package packed up and ready to go," Foster confirmed. He could hear the relief in Mike's breathing, the slight exhale that said more than words. The DJ had been surviving on crackers and ramen for days now, running low on everything. "There's a few weeks' worth of food in there, with plenty of variety. No ramen or crackers," Foster added. Mike's response came quickly, enthusiasm breaking through the exhaustion. "Thank God. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm thankful I'm not starving to death. But I don't want to see either of those things for a month or two," Mike said. Foster took another sip of his coffee, already looking forward to seeing the DJ's face when they arrived with real food. It would make the journey worth it. "Well, if everything goes to plan, by lunchtime you'll have a proper lunch," Foster said. There was a pause, longer this time. When Mike spoke again, his tone had shifted to something more cautious. "Realistically, it's probably going to be dinner," Mike said. Foster perked up at the timeline change, concern creeping into his thoughts. His grip on the coffee mug tightened slightly. Mike was always optimistic, always trying to spin things positively. Hearing him push back the estimate meant something was wrong. "Is there something you want to tell me, Mike?" Foster asked. Mike took a breath on the other end, preparing to deliver news he knew Foster wouldn't like. "Yeah, I'm going to be texting over the map once we hang up. But there's a bit of an issue with where you're going to be surfacing at," Mike explained. "How much of an issue?" Foster asked. "Instead of coming up a half-mile from the station, it's going to be 2 miles, Mike said. Foster let that hang in the air for a few moments before breaking the silence. 2 miles in a zombie-infested city was an eternity. Every block they had to cross meant more risk, more exposure, more chances for something to go wrong. 2 miles? Are you shitting me, Mike?" Foster asked. His tone carried frustration, though he tried to keep it in check. This wasn't Mike's fault, but the news complicated everything. "I wish I was Foster, but it's a perfect storm of bad luck. I checked the traffic cameras of some potential surfacing spots, and they're swarming with zombies. Some of the others are inaccessible thanks to construction," Mike explained. The DJ's voice carried regret, like he'd personally failed by not finding a better option. Foster could hear him shifting papers again, probably looking at the map for the 100th time trying to find an alternative. "The safest spot is a couple miles away at a maintenance building," Mike continued. Foster thought about it for a moment, running scenarios in his head. 2 miles was bad, but surfacing into a horde would be worse. At least the maintenance building would give them cover, a place to assess the situation before moving out. "Well, at least we'll be coming up under cover. That's something at least," Foster said. "I do have a bit of good news, though," Mike said. Foster's mood lifted slightly at that. Good news was in short supply these days. "That's a nice change of pace. What is it?" Foster asked. "I talked with my city worker friend about what you can expect down there, and he said that the bulk of the route through the tunnels should be clear for you," Mike explained. "How can he be so sure?" Foster asked. "Because the people who live down there tend to keep to themselves and relocate when there's construction. They're not supposed to be down there, but if they're out of sight, they're out of mind. The route he's having you go should keep you mostly in construction areas," Mike said. "It's not exactly foolproof, but I'll take what I can get at this point," Foster said. "I'm going to give him a call after we hang up, and if he has anything else for you, I'll send it over," Mike replied. Foster glanced at his watch, seeing they were already behind schedule. The sun was climbing higher, eating away at their daylight. "You better go ahead and call him then, because we're going to be heading out in 10. We're already burning daylight, and I don't want to be stuck out there after dark," Foster said. "I don't blame you, Foster. I'll be in touch." "Oh, and Captain?" Mike said. "Yeah, Mike, Foster replied. There was emotion in Mike's voice when he spoke next, gratitude mixed with something else. Maybe guilt that Foster and his men were risking their lives for him. Thank you for coming up here. I know it's a risk, but I greatly appreciate it, Mike said. Foster's expression softened. Mike had become more than just a voice on the radio. He was the glue holding the city's survivors together, giving them hope and information. Without him, their efforts to retake the city would be impossible. Of course, Mike. We're not going to be able to take this city back without you, Foster said. I'll be by the phone if you need anything, Mike replied. See you soon, Mike. I'll let you know when we're topside, Foster said. He clicked off the phone, pocketing it as he heard the chatter from the rest of his men coming from the other side of the office. Foster turned to see Hanson, Sullivan, Parker, and Thomas lugging bags of goods and dropping them behind a cubicle wall. The captain downed the last of his coffee, the liquid now lukewarm, but still welcome. He set the mug back in the break room area before walking over to his men, who continued carrying on with their conversation. Their voices bounced off the cubicle walls, the banter easy and familiar. Are we sure we're bringing enough food for this guy? Thomas asked. He hefted another bag, his arms straining slightly under the weight. The private was built solid, but even he was feeling the load. With as much as these bags weigh, we damn well better be, Parker replied. He dropped his bag with the others, rubbing his shoulder where the strap had dug in. His expression showed mock pain, playing it up for effect. Hanson looked over at Parker with a grin, seeing an opportunity to give the young private some grief. What's wrong, Parker? It's not too heavy for you, is it? Hanson asked. Parker straightened up, his pride not allowing him to admit weakness even in jest. It's not like we're just going around the block, Sarge. We're hiking through miles of zombie-infested tunnels while weighed down like we're rented pack mules, Parker said. Foster stepped into view, his presence immediately noticed by the group. They turned to look at him, waiting to hear what news he'd gotten from Mike. According to Mike, they might not be as zombie-infested as we think, Foster said. Relief washed over Parker's face, his shoulders dropping slightly. Thank Christ, Parker said. Sullivan reached down behind the cubicle wall, grabbing a large piece of plastic that looked like it was cut from a trash bin. He held it up proudly, the makeshift shield catching the light from the windows. The corporal's expression showed satisfaction with his handiwork, eager to show off what he'd created. Foster looked at it with confusion, trying to understand what he was looking at. The piece was roughly rectangular, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, with rough edges where it had been cut. That's a nice-looking piece of a trash can there, Sullivan, Foster said. The corporal smacked the front of it a few times, the plastic making a solid thunking sound. The material didn't flex or bend, staying rigid under the impacts. These things are sturdy, Cap. They aren't going to bend under pressure, and those things aren't getting through them, Sullivan explained. He turned it around, showing Foster the modifications he had made. Sullivan handed one over to Foster, who took it and examined the craftsmanship. A couple of leather straps had been bolted to the back, positioned for someone to slide their arm through. The bolts were secure, the leather thick and durable. Foster slid his arm through the straps, feeling the weight of the shield settle against his forearm. It was lighter than he expected, maybe 5 or 6 pounds. Easy to carry, but substantial enough to be effective. He tested moving it around, checking the range of motion. The shield responded well, maneuverable and balanced. Thomas, give me a push, Foster said. The private stepped forward, placing both hands against the plastic surface. He began pushing against it, applying steady pressure. Foster planted his feet in the ground, his legs taking a solid stance. He held firm, the shield keeping Thomas at bay without much effort. The plastic didn't flex, maintaining its shape under the force. They're lightweight, maneuverable, and will do a good job of shoving those things into the ravines if they get too close, Sullivan said. Foster nodded, impressed with the ingenuity. The shields would give them an advantage in the tunnels, a way to control the zombies without wasting ammunition or getting within biting range. All right, I'm sold, Foster said. So when do we leave? Hanson asked. As if he had summoned it, the captain's phone vibrated in his pocket. Foster pulled it out, seeing a text notification from Mike. He opened it, revealing the map of the tunnels that Mike had sent to him. The image showed a complex network of passages, with their route marked in red. Notes dotted the map, warning about potential hazards and marking key landmarks. Foster held the phone up, displaying the map with a smile. His men gathered around to get a look, studying the route they'd be taking. "We got everything we need. We're out of here in 5. Chapter 2. Foster, Hansen, Sullivan, Parker, and Thomas opened up the front gates of the compound, stepping out into the street. The metal hinges creaked as the gates rolled open, the sound carrying across the empty industrial landscape. They looked both ways, finding no creatures within sight. However, they could hear faint moans coming from the left. The sound was distant but unmistakable, that low groaning that had become the soundtrack to their existence. The noise drifted down the side streets, filtered through the barricades they had built. "Looks like those barricades are doing their job," Hansen said. The sergeant's tone carried satisfaction. The car barriers they'd positioned yesterday were keeping the zombies corralled, funneling them away from their compound. It was working exactly as planned. "Still, I don't want to draw a crowd," Foster replied. He looked back to one of the civilians that was shutting the gates. The man gripped the metal, preparing to pull it closed behind them. Foster caught his attention with a gesture. "You, do me a favor. Once you lock that up, go tell Private Cooper to do a sweep of the barricades," Foster said. The civilian nodded, understanding the importance of the task. "Of course, Captain," the man said. He began shutting the gate, the metal scraping as it swung closed. The lock clicked into place with a solid thunk, securing it. The sound left the soldiers standing in the street, cut off from the safety of the compound. Each man carried a canvas bag filled with food, the straps digging into their shoulders under the weight. They had hunting shotguns slung over their shoulders along with metal baseball bats that had been affixed with straps. Each of them also carried one of the plastic shields Sullivan had created, the makeshift armor held in their free hands. "All right, let's get over to the truck and get this show on the road," Foster said. The soldiers walked down the street, taking their time and enjoying their last moments of peace before the mission began. Despite being late in the year, it was warm. The sun bathed them in light as they walked, the heat already building even at this early hour. Their boots scuffed against the asphalt, the sound rhythmic and steady. The industrial area around them was quiet, buildings standing silent with their roll-up doors sealed. A light breeze carried dust across the pavement, the only movement in an otherwise still landscape. The normalcy of it felt strange, like they'd stepped back in time before everything went wrong. As they approached the end of the block and the 3 cars that had been used to block it off, Foster motioned for the others to pause as he continued to approach. His hand came up, palm out, and the men stopped without question. The captain moved forward alone, his boots carrying him to the makeshift barricade. He jumped up onto the hood of the nearest car, the metal denting slightly under his weight. From his elevated position, he could see over the barrier, looking down the street in both directions. His eyes scanned methodically, checking doorways and alleys and parked vehicles. A smattering of creatures roamed around in the distance, maybe half a dozen visible. They shambled between buildings, moving without purpose or direction. But none of them were close enough to be a problem. Foster felt relief wash over him at the sight. "All right, we're good," Foster called back. The rest of the men traversed the barricade, climbing over the cars one by one. They dropped down on the other side, regrouping before walking down half a block to the maintenance truck that had been their main source of transportation over the last several days. The vehicle sat where they had left it, undisturbed and ready. The white paint was dulled with dust and grime, the sides marked with scrapes and dents from their missions. But it still ran, and that was all that mattered. They piled in, with Foster behind the wheel. Hansen took shotgun as always, his preferred position. Sullivan, Parker, and Thomas climbed into the bed, arranging themselves among the supplies and equipment. Their shields leaned against the sides of the truck bed, propped up and ready. Foster slid the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine turned over immediately, rumbling to life with that familiar sound. He checked his mirrors, making sure everyone was set, then put the truck in drive. With a turn of the key, they were on their way. Foster drove them down the street, keeping the speed low so that they could look around. The truck moved at maybe 15 miles per hour, slow enough to spot threats before they became problems. He kept his eyes moving constantly, scanning left and right and checking the mirrors for anything approaching from behind. Most of the area was empty of zombies, only the occasional one stumbling around, looking for something to shamble after. The creatures they did spot paid them little attention, too far away or too focused on nothing to register the truck's presence. It was almost peaceful if you ignored what those shambling figures represented. The industrial district gave way to more commercial areas as they drove. Strip malls and office buildings lined the streets, their parking lots empty except for abandoned vehicles. Some storefronts had been smashed in, dark interiors visible through broken glass. Others looked untouched, like the employees might return any moment. They drove for several minutes, never encountering a threat before reaching the maintenance building. The structure sat on a corner lot, a single-story concrete block building with the city logo painted on the side. A smattering of creatures were around the entrance, forcing the captain to stop half a block short. Foster counted 6 of them, all shambling near the front door. They moved in slow circles, bumping into each other and the building's walls. None of them had noticed the truck yet. Foster put the vehicle in park but left it running. He turned in his seat to look at the men in the back. "Sullivan, Parker, Thomas, why don't you go test those shields out?" Foster asked. There was a collection of affirmatives as the trio of soldiers in the back of the truck jumped out. Their boots hit the pavement with solid thuds, one after another. They grabbed their shields and bats, checking their gear one final time. In a flash, they were over to the zombies, which had taken notice of them. The creatures turned toward the approaching soldiers, their moans growing louder with excitement. Arms raised, reaching for the living flesh moving toward them. Corporal Sullivan took point, rushing up to the first zombie with his shield raised. The plastic surface was held high, protecting his torso and face. The zombie shambled forward to meet him, its movements uncoordinated but determined. Just before the creature reached him, Sullivan darted forward, planting the large plastic shield firmly into its chest. The impact was solid. The zombie's momentum stopped completely. Its arms flailed, trying to reach around the barrier, but Sullivan kept the shield positioned perfectly. The creature pushed against the plastic, its weight leaning into it. Sullivan stood his ground, planting his feet and allowing the zombie a chance to push through it. His legs were spread in a solid stance, knees bent slightly to absorb any force. The muscles in his arms tensed, holding the shield firm. Despite the rage coming from the other side, the ghoul was never able to reach the soldier on the other side. The shield held perfectly, the sturdy trash can plastic refusing to bend or flex. "I think we got us something here, boys," Sullivan said. His voice carried confidence and satisfaction. The shield was working exactly as he'd hoped. Sullivan lunged forward, driving the zombie backwards rapidly. The creature's feet scrambled to keep up with the sudden movement, its balance already poor. The backwards momentum caused it to get tripped up on its feet, the coordination simply not there. As soon as it hit the ground, the corporal grabbed the bat from his shoulder and delivered a forceful strike to its head. The metal connected with a wet crack, the skull caving in. The zombie went still immediately, its arms dropping to its sides. Thomas and Parker joined in the fray, utilizing similar tactics and getting a feel for their makeshift shields. Thomas rushed a zombie on the right, his shield slamming into its chest. The creature stumbled back, arms windmilling. Thomas followed up quickly, another shield bash sending it to the ground. His bat came down hard, finishing it. Parker engaged 2 at once, using his shield to keep them at bay. He worked them in a circle, maintaining distance while looking for an opening. When one got too close, he shoved hard with the shield, sending it sprawling. The second one lunged, and Parker sidestepped, bringing his bat around in a wide arc. The metal caught it in the temple, dropping it instantly. In a matter of minutes, all of the ghouls were put down for the final time. 6 bodies lay scattered around the entrance to the maintenance building, dark blood pooling beneath them. The soldiers stood among the corpses, breathing slightly harder, but looking pleased with their performance. The trio turned back to the truck, watching it drive up to the door. Foster brought the vehicle right up to the entrance, positioning it for easy unloading. The captain gave them a thumbs up as he drove by, his approval clear. "So, whose idea was the shield?" Foster asked as he put the truck in park. Thomas gestured to Sullivan with his bat, giving credit where it was due. "Sullivan came up with it, Cap," Thomas said. "When we get back to the compound, we're breaking out a ribeye for you," Foster said. Parker's head snapped up at the mention of steak, his eyes widening. The thought of real meat, cooked properly, was almost too good to imagine. He spoke up on instinct upon hearing that steak was the reward. "I was the one who picked out the trash cans," Parker said. The men looked over to him, their expressions a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Parker's face fell as he realized how weak his claim sounded. He hung his head, knowing that it was a weak move. Sullivan had designed the shields, done the cutting and bolting and testing. Parker had just pointed at some trash cans in the warehouse. Sullivan grinned, enjoying Parker's discomfort for a moment before throwing him a bone. "I tell you what, Parker, I'll let you dip your French fries into some of the steak juice when I cut into it," Sullivan said. Parker let out a defeated sigh as everyone broke into laughter. The sound echoed off the maintenance building, a moment of levity before the real work began. After a moment, they moved into the building, shouldering their gear and heading for the door. The interior was dark, lit only by emergency lighting. The space was utilitarian, filled with tools and equipment and filing cabinets. A break room was visible through a doorway, and offices lined one wall, but their attention was focused on the floor near the back, where a manhole cover sat embedded in the concrete. They secured the door behind them, throwing the deadbolt and checking that it was solid. The last thing they needed was zombies following them inside. Satisfied, the group stepped over to the manhole cover, gathering around it. Foster and Hansen bent down, gripping the cover's edge. They lifted together, the heavy metal disc coming up with a groan of protest. They slid it to the side, revealing the dark opening below. The smell hit them immediately, that distinctive underground odor of stale air and concrete and water. But underneath it was something else, the faint hint of decay. They looked down into the darkness, their flashlights cutting through the black. A ladder descended into the tunnel system, disappearing into shadow. "I can't believe we're actually going back down into these goddamn tunnels," Thomas said. His voice carried resignation and dread. The last time they'd been in the tunnels had been days ago, fighting through darkness and terror. The memory wasn't pleasant. Parker tried to find a positive angle, anything to make it less awful. "At least everything's slower now," Parker said. Thomas looked at him, his expression making it clear that being slightly less terrifying didn't make it good. "It's still a dark and claustrophobic zombie-infused nightmare, though," Thomas replied. Parker thought about it for a moment, trying to come up with another positive. He shrugged, the gesture admitting defeat while still holding his ground. "Yeah, but they're slower, so that's something," Parker said. "And according to Mike, it's impossible to go via surface streets because the entire downtown area is clogged with those things," Foster explained. Thomas shifted his weight, his hand gripping his shield tighter, his jaw set, but the question came anyway. "How many are we talking?" Thomas asked. Foster's expression was grim, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Enough of them that even if we had a tank, we'd have trouble getting through them," Foster said. The mental image settled over them. Thousands upon thousands of zombies packed into downtown Las Vegas, a solid mass of undead flesh filling the streets. There was no fighting through that. No amount of ammunition or firepower that could clear a path. The tunnels were the only way. Thomas nodded slowly, accepting the reality of their situation. "All right, the tunnels it is," Thomas said. Sergeant Hansen stepped up, sliding his shield through the opening before carefully climbing down. His hands gripped the ladder rungs, testing each one before putting his weight on it. The metal was cold under his palms, slightly damp from condensation. He descended into darkness, his boots finding purchase on each rung. As soon as his boots hit the concrete below, he pulled his flashlight from his vest. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the tunnel in both directions. Concrete walls stretched away, disappearing into shadow. He swept the light methodically, checking for movement or threats. After confirming it was clear, he motioned for the others to join. His hand waved up toward the opening, visible in the light from above. It took a few minutes for the group to get into the tunnels, their bags and shields making for some difficult climbing. Each man had to carefully maneuver his gear through the opening, sliding the canvas bags down first, then the shields, before climbing down themselves. The process was slow and awkward, equipment clanking against metal and concrete. Once situated, however, Foster took point and began leading them through based on the map on his phone. The screen glowed in the darkness, showing their position and the route ahead. Red lines marked their path, winding through the tunnel network toward the north side of the city. They remained quiet as they walked, wincing as they heard faint moaning echoing off the walls. The sound was distant and distorted, bouncing through the tunnels in ways that made it impossible to tell exactly where it came from. While it was low and seemingly in few numbers, just knowing that they weren't alone down here put everyone on edge. Their flashlights swept the darkness ahead, beams crossing and overlapping. The tunnels were larger than Foster had expected, maybe 8 feet across with enough headroom to stand comfortably. Pipes ran along the walls, and occasional side passages branched off into deeper darkness. After half a mile of tunnels, they could hear moaning coming from just up ahead. The sound was closer now, more distinct. Foster put his hand up, getting everyone to stop. The group froze, their boots going silent on the concrete. He pulled his flashlight to his chest to minimize their exposure, the beam pointing down at the ground. The captain listened intently to the sound coming from ahead, his head tilted slightly. The moan echoed once, twice. A single voice, not a chorus. Once he was confident it was just a single zombie, he lifted his flashlight, drawing its attention. The beam found the creature 30 feet ahead. The zombie was badly deformed, missing at least a dozen pieces of flesh from what had to have been a grisly end to their previous life. Chunks of meat were gone from its arms and torso, the wounds ragged and torn. Its clothes hung in tatters, soaked with old blood. The ghoul moaned and shambled forward, barely having the muscle strength to remain upright. Its legs worked poorly, each step uncertain and wobbling. The damage to its body had left it weak, a shell of what it had been even as a fresh zombie. Rather than attack, Foster stepped forward, using the shield to shove the ghoul over the edge. He planted his feet and pushed hard, the plastic surface connecting with the zombie's chest. The creature had no strength to resist, its body going backwards immediately. It toppled over the edge of the walkway, falling into the ravine below. It moaned for a moment before landing with a wet thud on the concrete below. The sound echoed up, followed by silence. Foster shined his flashlight onto it, seeing that its skull cracked open on impact. Dark fluid pooled around the broken head, the zombie finally still. "Come on, we still have a ways to go," Foster said. The group got moving again, walking for another half-mile before slowing down. Their pace had been steady, eating up distance in the darkness. But something ahead made them cautious. There wasn't much in the way of noise up ahead. Rather, it was an intense smell that gave them pause. The odor hit them like a wall, thick and cloying. They were used to the smells of the dead, that rotting flesh stench that followed zombies everywhere. But this was an intense version of that sensation, magnified 100 times. It smelled like a mob of them, like dozens of bodies left to decay in the heat. However, they couldn't hear any noise coming from ahead, which really put them on edge. If there were that many zombies, they should be able to hear moaning, the shuffle of feet, something. But there was only silence, and that overwhelming smell. Foster turned back to the men, keeping his voice low. His hand came up, signaling them to prepare for trouble. "Hanson, Parker, get your guns ready. If this goes bad, Sullivan and I will hold the line while you retreat back to the last crossover point," Foster said. The men nodded, their expressions serious. Hanson and Parker unslung their shotguns, checking that shells were chambered. The metallic sound of the actions working seemed loud in the confined space. Foster turned back to the front, leading them ahead cautiously. Each step was measured, deliberate. Their flashlights swept the darkness, searching for the source of the smell. The odor grew stronger with every yard, becoming almost unbearable. They moved up to the next intersection, which appeared to be at a major artery of the tunnel system. Multiple passages converged here, creating a larger open space. The ceiling rose higher, and the walkway widened into a platform. The smell was overwhelming, nearly causing the captain to retch. His stomach churned, bile rising in his throat. He managed to hold it together, breathing through his mouth to minimize the impact. Foster stepped up close to the edge, shining his flashlight down into the ravine below. "Jesus Christ," Foster said. His voice carried shock and something close to awe. Foster looked down, spotting 100 zombie bodies piled up high below. They were stacked like cordwood, limbs tangled and twisted together, all of them lifeless, their heads caved in. The damage was extensive, skulls shattered and brains exposed. Blood and other fluids pooled beneath the pile, the source of the smell. The other men joined him at the edge, their flashlights adding to the illumination. The scene below was carnage on a scale they hadn't seen before. This wasn't random zombie attacks or survivors defending themselves. This was systematic, methodical killing. As they continued staring, a rapid set of footsteps kicked up from their left. The sound was fast, too fast. Foster turned quickly, shining his flashlight towards the noise. The beam caught a fast-moving figure that seemed to be yelling. The shape was human, sprinting toward them through the tunnel. "What the hell?" Foster said. Chapter 3. The figure rushed towards Foster, yelling at the top of its lungs. The sound echoed off the tunnel walls, amplified and distorted by the enclosed space. The captain ducked down behind his shield, his body tensing for impact. He expected the figure to slam into the plastic barrier like a zombie would, mindless and driven only by hunger. Rather than running straight into it like a zombie would have, the figure stopped just short. The movement was controlled, calculated. A foot planted firmly into the center of the shield, with enough force to send Foster tumbling backwards to the ground. The kick was powerful, purposeful. The impact knocked the wind from Foster's lungs as his back hit the concrete hard. The captain immediately knew something was off. Zombies didn't kick, didn't show that kind of coordination or tactical thinking. This was human, which meant it could be reasoned with. He raised his flashlight towards the figure while yelling out, his voice urgent and commanding. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" Foster shouted. Hansen and Parker had already raised their shotguns, the weapons coming up to their shoulders on instinct. But they held their fire, trusting Foster's judgment. Their flashlights joined his, aiming towards the figure. The combined beams illuminated the attacker so that they could get a good look. The man was middle-aged, looking worse for wear. His appearance was that of someone who'd been living rough even before the outbreak. He had tattered and bloody clothes, the fabric torn and stained dark. A bushy beard covered the lower half of his face, the hair stained red with what could only be blood. His eyes were wild, a crazed look in them, as he raised a bloody, jagged blade above the captain. The weapon looked homemade, maybe a piece of rebar or metal that had been sharpened to a point. The man let out another primal scream as he drove the weapon down towards Foster. The sound was raw, fueled by terror and rage and days of horror. The blade came down fast, aimed at Foster's chest. The captain raised his shield just high enough so that when the tip of the blade pierced through the plastic, it stopped just short of stabbing him. The point punched through Sullivan's trash can shield, penetrating maybe 2 inches before catching. Foster felt the pressure against his chest, but no pain, the makeshift armor doing its job. Foster twisted to the side, yanking the weapon free from the man. The blade came loose with a tearing sound, plastic fragmenting around the puncture. The attacker stumbled forward slightly, thrown off balance by losing his weapon. He continued yelling as he backed up a step to regroup for another attack, his hands coming up in fists. Before he could, however, Sullivan darted forward and wrapped his arms around the man's waist. The corporal's grip was firm, but not violent, restraining rather than attacking. He lifted the man slightly, pinning his arms. "Easy, buddy, you're okay, Sullivan said. His voice was calm, soothing, the tone you'd use with a frightened animal or a traumatized child. The man continued thrashing about, his body fighting against the restraint. He kicked and twisted, trying to break free. Guttural sounds came from his throat, wordless and anguished. The other soldiers in the group clicked on their flashlights, fully illuminating the area so that the man could see they were alive and friendly. The beams swept across faces, showing clean skin and clear eyes. Not the dead, vacant stare of zombies, but the warm presence of living humans. Sullivan continued his tight grip as the man began to calm down. The thrashing slowed, then stopped. His breathing was ragged as he struggled to control himself, each breath coming in gasps. The fight drained out of him gradually, replaced by confusion and exhaustion. After several tense moments, he spoke, his voice hoarse. You're not one of those people?" the man asked. The question carried desperate hope, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Hansen lowered his shotgun, his posture becoming less threatening. "We're not. We're alive, just like you," Hansen said. The man's anger quickly faded, replaced with sobbing and tears of joy. The stress of the previous few days hit him all at once, the dam finally breaking. His body shook with the force of it. years of rough living and days of pure terror pouring out. Sullivan felt the man go limp, so he helped lower him to the ground. They settled onto the concrete together, Sullivan's arms still around the man's shoulders. "Easy now, you're okay. We got you." "My name's Sullivan. What's yours?" Sullivan asked. The man took a shuddering breath, trying to compose himself enough to answer. "It's Clyde," the man said. Sullivan gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze, his tone remaining gentle. "Well, Clyde, it's nice to meet you. These are my friends Foster, Hanson, Parker, and Thomas," Sullivan said. Clyde continued struggling to control his breathing as he nodded to them. His eyes moved from face to face, taking them in. Living people, armed and organized. Salvation after days of hell. As the man gathered himself, Hanson helped Foster up off the ground, his hand gripping the captain's forearm and pulling him to his feet. "That was a good eye there, Cap. I nearly blew his head off," Hanson said. His voice was low, meant only for Foster. The admission carried weight. They'd come within a heartbeat of killing a survivor, of adding one more body to the piles of dead. "As soon as he kicked me, I knew something was off," Foster replied. He brushed concrete dust from his pants, then retrieved his flashlight. Foster got back to his feet, turning the light down into the channel in the middle of the tunnel. The beam swept across the pile of bodies below, illuminating the carnage. 100 corpses stacked like cordwood, all with their heads caved in. The work of one man, or maybe two. "Clyde, did you have a hand in this?" Foster asked. He kept his tone neutral, not accusing, but curious. Clyde looked up at the question, his eyes following Foster's flashlight beam down into the pit. The sight of all those bodies seemed to drain what little color remained in his face. He took a deep breath before giving a subtle nod, the gesture small and defeated. "My friend Benji and I, we got surprised by a few of them the other night. My eyes were barely open when I saw them biting into him," Clyde said. His voice cracked on his friend's name, the memory still raw. Clyde got choked up, his throat working as he tried to continue. Sullivan rubbed his back, the gesture simple but comforting. The man appreciated it, leaning slightly into the contact. "I grabbed a baseball bat and went to town on them. I broke so many bones, but those people, they just wouldn't stop. I might as well been hitting the floor as much good as it was doing. But then I caught one in the head, and it put him down," Clyde explained. Clyde's hand began shaking as if the stress of remembering the moment was overwhelming him. The tremor spread up his arm, his whole body starting to shake. He took another deep breath to steady himself, his hands clenching into fists to stop the shaking. "I finally got them off of old Benji, but he was bleeding out. There wasn't anything I could have done," Clyde said. The soldiers remained silent, letting the man work through his grief. They'd all seen people die, had all lost someone in the past few days. The guilt that came with survival was familiar territory. Then Benji started getting up, looking at me the same way those people were looking at him. "So, I had to put him down too," Clyde continued. The words came out flat, emotionless, like he'd used up all his feelings and had nothing left. Clyde wiped a tear away from his eye before continuing, his finger leaving a streak through the grime on his face. "I called out for help, but all that did was make things worse. Everybody I knew in these tunnels, they were getting torn apart, then getting up and tearing into more of my friends. I tried to run, but they were everywhere. So I did the only thing I could do, hide and fight," Clyde said. He drifted off into thought, his eyes distant. The soldiers looked back into the pit of the dead, seeing it in a new light now. This wasn't the work of a military unit or an organized group. This was one man fighting for his life in the dark, putting down his friends and neighbors one by one. The pile represented days of horror, of desperate survival. Parker and Thomas had stepped away from the group slightly, speaking in low voices. Their conversation carried back to the others in fragments. "Jesus Christ, I can't imagine what that guy has been through," Parker said. His tone carried sympathy and a hint of fear. Any of them could have ended up like Clyde, alone and fighting in the dark. Thomas nodded, his expression troubled. "The question is, what are we going to do with him?" Thomas asked. The practical concern cut through the emotion. They had a mission, supplies to deliver, limited time. Adding a traumatized survivor to the mix complicated everything. He seems to be doing okay on his own, Parker said. Parker and Thomas glanced back to Clyde, who had begun rocking back and forth as the trauma of the past few days continued to wash over him. His arms wrapped around himself, and he mumbled something inaudible. The motion was rhythmic, self-soothing. Clearly the man was not doing okay. Or not, Parker added. Hansen joined the conversation, his voice carrying the weight of command. We could bring him with us. He's clearly capable of handling himself, Hansen said. The sergeant gestured toward the pit of bodies, the evidence of Clyde's capability undeniable. 100 zombies put down by one man was no small feat. That kind of fighter would be valuable. Parker shook his head, his concern shifting from sympathy to practicality. Or he might have a flashback as soon as he hears one of those things moan and crack one of us over the back of the head, Parker replied. As much as I hate to admit it, Sarge, Parker has a point. That man needs to see some sunlight and get checked out by a doctor before I'd be comfortable sharing a battlefield with him, Thomas said. Hansen looked to Foster, deferring to the captain's judgment on the matter. Cap, do you want to chime in here? Hansen asked. Foster thought about it for another moment, weighing their options. Leave Clyde here, and he'd likely die, either from zombies or from his own trauma. Bring him along, and he could be a liability, or worse, a danger. Send him back, and they'd be down a man. He let out a sigh, his decision made. Sullivan, Foster said. The corporal looked up from where he sat with Clyde, his attention on his captain. Yes, Cap? Sullivan asked. Take our new friend here back to the compound, Foster ordered. Sullivan got up from his crouch position beside Clyde, stepping over to the others. He kept his voice low so that the newcomer couldn't hear, leaning in close to Foster. Captain, getting to Mike is more important than one man, Sullivan said. His tone wasn't argumentative, just stating a fact. They all knew Mike was critical to coordinating the city's survivors. Losing a soldier to escort one traumatized man back seemed like a poor trade. Foster understood the objection, but held his ground. We can't just leave the man down here, and to be honest, if he's capable of doing this on his own, he just might come in handy in a fight, Foster replied. He gestured to the pit again, making his point. Sullivan thought about it for a moment, his jaw working as he considered the captain's reasoning. Eventually he nodded, accepting the order. He knew that the captain was right. Skilled fighters were a valuable commodity these days, and in short supply. If Clyde could be brought back from the edge, he'd be worth having on their side. If you text me that map, I'll catch up to you after I drop him off, Sullivan said. Foster shook his head, already anticipating the offer. No, I want you to stay with him. He seemed to respond to you, so make sure he gets settled, Foster said. Sullivan wasn't happy about missing the mission, but he nodded in agreement anyway. Orders were orders, and Foster's reasoning was sound. The corporal had established a connection with Clyde, and breaking that now could undo any progress. Foster stepped over to Clyde, taking a knee in front of him and placing a hand on his shoulder. The contact got the man's attention, his rockings slowing. Clyde looked up, meeting Foster's eyes. Clyde, my friend Sullivan here is going to take you back to our compound. You'll be safe there. We have food, medicine, whatever you need, Foster said. His voice was firm but kind, the tone of someone making a promise they intended to keep. Clyde took a moment to process the words, then looked up. He gave Foster a thankful nod, emotion threatening to overwhelm him again. That's mighty kind of you, sir. I don't know what I can do to repay you, Clyde said. Foster's grip on his shoulder tightened slightly, reassuring. You don't have to do anything except get better. Now we have to keep moving, but Sullivan is going to take good care of you, Foster said. Clyde nodded as Foster stood up and extended his hand. The homeless man reached up, his fingers gripping Foster's palm. The captain pulled him to his feet, Clyde's legs unsteady but holding. He gave everybody a thankful nod, his eyes moving from face to face again. These men had saved his life, given him hope when there was none. Clyde stepped over to Sullivan, who handed his bag of food over to Parker. The private took it with both hands, immediately groaning under the weight. Be safe, Cap, and let me know when you get to the station, Sullivan said. Hansen grinned, already planning the moment. We'll be sure to give you a shout out over the air, Hansen said. Sullivan chuckled as the two groups parted ways. The corporal put a hand on Clyde's shoulder, guiding him back the way they'd come. Their flashlights faded into the distance, leaving the foursome in relative darkness. Foster, Hansen, Parker, and Thomas moved deeper into the tunnels. They moved swiftly, knowing that the immediate area was clear of zombies. Clyde had done them an unexpected favor, clearing their path of threats. Their flashlights swept the darkness ahead, boots moving quickly on the concrete. The tunnels all looked the same after a while. Concrete walls and pipes, the occasional ladder leading up to the surface. Side passages branched off into darkness, and they passed maintenance rooms with locked doors. Foster kept his phone out, checking their position against Mike's map every few minutes. It took the better part of a half hour for them to follow the map to its end. The route had taken them through the city's underground, winding north and east through passages that rarely saw maintenance workers. They'd passed through construction zones and old sections that smelled of standing water. The group stopped, their flashlights pointing up at the manhole cover at the top of the metal ladder. The exit was marked on Mike's map with a red circle, their destination within the maintenance building above. "All right, this is our stop," Foster said. He dropped his shield, the plastic clattering on the concrete. Foster handed over his bag of food to Hansen, the sergeant taking it with a grunt. The captain gripped the ladder rungs, testing them before putting his weight on them. The metal was cold and slightly damp, but solid. Foster climbed carefully, his muscles working to pull him up. The ladder rose maybe 15 feet, each rung bringing him closer to the surface. At the top, he braced himself and pushed against the heavy metal plate. The metal scraped and then gave, sliding to the side with a grinding sound that seemed too loud. Foster pulled himself up into the room, his hands finding purchase on the floor. He quickly swept the area with his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The maintenance building was small, maybe 20 by 30 feet. Tool racks lined the walls, and filing cabinets sat in corners. A desk occupied one side, papers scattered across its surface. He was relieved to find that the building was empty of zombies. However, he could hear moaning coming from outside, putting him on edge. The sound was muffled by walls but distinct. Multiple voices, maybe dozens of them. The captain leaned back through the hole, whispering as he motioned for them to climb. "We have company outside, so keep it down," Foster said. The men nodded, understanding the need for silence. One by one, they climbed up, their movements careful and controlled. Thomas came first, then Parker struggling under the weight of 2 bags. Hansen brought up the rear, leaving the shields behind. Before too long, they were in the maintenance building, the sounds of moaning coming from outside. The noise was constant, that low groaning that never seemed to stop. Hansen stepped over to one of the windows, making sure he was out of sight as he pulled the blinds back a couple of inches. He positioned himself at an angle, peeking through the gap. He adjusted his view so that he could see the parking lot. His breath caught as he saw dozens of ghouls just on the other side of the glass. Easily 40 or 50 of them, maybe more out of his line of sight. Hansen let out a gasp, the sound quiet but shocked. "I swear, just once I wish one of these outings would be easy." Chapter 4. The 4 soldiers moved quietly around the small maintenance building, checking windows to get a sense of the zombie infestation just on the other side of the walls. Their boots were soft on the floor, each step measured and careful. The building felt like a cage, protective but confining. One wrong move, one loud noise, and they'd have every zombie in the area bearing down on them. Hansen moved from the first window he looked through over to the one at the far end of the wall. He pulled back the curtain just an inch. His eye pressed close to the gap. The sight made him mutter curses under his breath, his jaw clenching. He had a clear view across the parking lot to the street, and there were dozens of creatures within view. They shambled aimlessly through the lot, clustered in small groups. Most of them were at the street, maybe 50 yards away. But even with their shambling nature, it would only take them a minute to reach the building if they thought someone was inside. Their slow pace was deceptive, distance collapsing quickly when they got motivated. Plus, there was always the risk of there being a runner amongst them. The fast ones were harder to spot until they moved, blending in with the shamblers until something triggered that burst of speed. One runner could alert the whole horde, turn a manageable situation into a death trap. Hansen retreated to the middle of the room, where the others joined him after looking out their respective windows. They formed a loose circle, their voices barely above whispers. Everybody spoke softly, not wanting to risk alerting the ghouls outside. The walls were thin, and sound carried in ways you couldn't predict. Well, we're not walking out of here, at least not easily. I got 30 to 40 of them between here and the road, and God only knows what's beyond that, Hansen said. Thomas shook his head, his expression grim. The view from his window hadn't been any better, just a different angle on the same nightmare. It wasn't any better on the east side either. Parking lot is packed with them, Thomas said. Foster's mind was already working through options, looking for solutions. They needed a way out, preferably one that didn't involve fighting through a horde. What about transportation? Foster asked. Both Thomas and Hansen shook their heads, the gesture simultaneous and dejected. I got nothing, Thomas said. Me either, Cap, Hansen added. Foster turned to Parker, his last hope for good news. Parker? Foster asked. The private had been studying the rear approach, looking for any advantage they could use. He took a breath before responding, his tone measured. The rear is a little less crowded, but we're going to draw a crowd if we go that way. Even so, I think that's the play, Parker said. Foster raised an eyebrow, interested in Parker's reasoning. Drawing a crowd was the last thing they wanted, so there had to be something that made it worth the risk. Why do you say that? Foster asked. Parker gestured toward the back of the building, his hand moving in the direction of what he'd seen. Because there are some stores just across the field. I can't really tell what from this distance, but maybe we'll get lucky with a vehicle, Parker explained. Thomas wasn't convinced, his skepticism clear in his expression and tone. Or maybe we'll run into a mob of those things, Thomas said. Parker shrugged, acknowledging the risk but standing by his assessment. It sounds like that's going to be the case no matter which way we go, Parker replied. Thomas thought about it for a moment, his jaw working as he considered their options. None of them were good, but Parker was right. They were surrounded. Any direction they went would mean fighting. He reluctantly nodded, accepting the logic. This really isn't our day, Thomas said. Foster looked around at his men, waiting to see if anyone had an alternative. The silence stretched out, seconds ticking by, with no better ideas emerging. Does anybody have a better option? Foster asked. Before anybody could respond, a zombie began smacking against the window on the far end of the building. The sound cut through the quiet like a gunshot, a meaty thud against glass. The group immediately froze, every muscle tensing. They didn't even breathe, not wanting to attract any more attention to themselves. Maybe it was just one zombie stumbling into the building by accident. Maybe it would wander away if they stayed still and quiet. Their silent prayers went unanswered as several more hands began hitting the side of the building. The thuds multiplied, creating a rhythm of impacts. Then came the moans, a chorus of them rising from outside. The sound was hungry, excited. The zombies had found them. Hansen, see what we're dealing with, Foster said. His voice was tight, controlled. The sergeant nodded and rushed to the window, his boots moving quickly across the floor. He looked out to the parking lot towards the street, his hand pulling the curtain back wider. What he saw made his stomach drop. Every creature within view was intently focused on them, shambling in their direction. The scattered groups had coalesced into a mob, all moving with purpose toward the building. He counted quickly, his eyes picking out the faster ones. A couple of runners were mixed into the group, their bodies moving with that terrifying coordination. We're boned, Cap, Hansen said. Foster didn't hesitate. He unslung his shotgun in one smooth motion, the weapon coming off his shoulder and into his hands. He bent down and picked up the food bag off the floor, the canvas strap going over his shoulder. His actions got the other soldiers to do the same, muscle memory taking over. They grabbed their bags, checked their weapons, prepared to move. Any pretense of stealth was out the window, and they knew it. The zombies were coming, and the only question now was whether they could outrun them. Everybody out the back now, Foster ordered. His voice carried command, cutting through the rising panic. Foster led the group over to the back door, his stride purposeful. The foursome staged by the exit for a moment, forming up in a line. The captain glanced back, making sure everybody was ready to go. 3 faces looked back at him, tense but focused. Weapons up, bags secured, ready. Foster pulled open the door, the hinges creaking as it swung wide. Sunlight flooded in, bright after the dim interior. He got one step outside before he spotted a runner coming at him from beside the back dumpster. The creature had been hidden by the large metal container, waiting or just wandering, but now it saw him and charged. Foster raised his shotgun, the stock coming to his shoulder. He held firm until the creature got within 5 yards of him, close enough that he couldn't miss. The captain squeezed the trigger, the weapon booming loud. The slug hit center mass on the zombie's face, obliterating its head. Bone and tissue exploded outward, the body dropping mid-stride. The other 3 soldiers darted out, moving past Foster as he racked another shell. Hansen covered the left flank with Parker on the right, both men scanning for threats. They spotted movement, zombies emerging from around the building's corners. Both men fired off a single shot toward zombies that were too close for comfort, the creatures dropping with ruined heads. Thomas stepped up beside Foster, his eyes fixed on the stores that were across an open field a couple 100 yards long. The grass was overgrown, maybe 6 inches high. Nothing moved in it, no zombies visible in the open space. But beyond that in the parking lot, they spotted a couple dozen creatures that had turned in their direction due to the noise. The gunshots had given away their position, drawn every zombie in earshot. The mob was building, shambling toward them, with arms raised. "Let's move!" Foster shouted. He took off running, his legs pumping hard. The food bag bounced against his hip, the weight pulling at his shoulder. Foster lowered his shoulder as a shambler stumbled into his path, the impact knocking the creature off its feet. The zombie went down hard, tumbling across the pavement. The collision cleared the path to the grass for the others, giving them a clean line. Hansen was the last man off the pavement, his boots hitting the grass as he glanced back. He spotted the 2 runners that were pushing their way through the pack of shamblers, their bodies moving fast. They shoved other zombies aside, focused entirely on the living humans fleeing across the field. "Parker, I need you," Hansen called out. Parker stopped on a dime, his boots digging into the grass. He turned around and raised his shotgun alongside Hansen, both of them getting the runners in their sights. The weapons came up smooth, practiced. They'd done this dance before, knew how to work together. The ghouls rushed past the side of the building, closing the distance fast, 15 yards and getting closer every second. "I got the one on the left," Hansen said. "Copy that, Sarge," Parker replied. They tracked the runners as they ran through a couple of shamblers, the faster zombies knocking the slower ones to the ground in their haste. Bodies tumbled, creating brief obstacles. The runners didn't slow, leaping over fallen creatures. As they got within 5 yards, both soldiers fired. The simultaneous blasts echoed across the field. Their aim was true, slugs ripping through the runners' heads and dropping them. The bodies barely hit the ground before the duo turned and pumped their legs hard, trying to catch up with Thomas and Foster. Their leaders were 30 yards ahead of them, running hard across the open field. The grass whipped at their legs as they ran. Hansen and Parker pushed themselves, closing the gap. They watched Foster and Thomas get to the edge of the lot, then saw them come to a stop. The sudden halt was concerning. If they'd stopped running, something was wrong. It didn't take long for Hansen and Parker to see what had caused the pause, their own forward momentum carrying them to where they could see the parking lot. There were roughly 150 zombies in the lot, all of whom were marching towards them. The horde filled the space between the stores, a solid mass of bodies shambling across asphalt. They spotted a couple of vehicles scattered through the lot, sedans and trucks abandoned between the stores, but they were nearly completely enveloped by the zombie horde, creatures packed so tight around them that reaching the vehicles would be impossible. "What in the hell do we do now?" Thomas asked. His voice carried frustration and fear. They were trapped between 2 hordes, the maintenance building behind them, now crawling with zombies, and a wall of undead ahead. Everybody turned to Foster, waiting for the captain to make the call. His eyes scanned the line of stores, looking for any option that didn't end with them being torn apart. The strip mall was maybe 5 stores wide. They were mostly smaller shops, businesses that catered to the neighborhood. A cell phone store, a sandwich shop, some kind of office supply place. A supercenter anchored the far end, its massive bulk dominating that side of the lot. However, Foster's eyes fixated on the big box store closest to them, a chain hardware store. The building was large, maybe 10,000 square feet, the kind of place that sold everything from lumber to lawnmowers. Foster looked to the front doors, which appeared to be shut. The glass reflected the afternoon sun, giving no view of the interior. There were 20 or so zombies standing between them and the entrance, shambling through the lot, with dozens more closing the distance quickly, drawn by the gunfire and the sight of living humans. But a hardware store meant tools, meant materials, maybe even a vehicle in the back for deliveries. It was their best shot. "Hardware store! Let's move!" Foster shouted. He took off running with the others following close behind, their boots pounding on the asphalt. The zombies ahead turned toward them, moaning with excitement, arms raised, reaching for flesh that was still yards away. As they got halfway across the lot, within 30 yards of the front door, Foster stopped and opened fire on a line of zombies blocking their path. He raised his shotgun and squeezed the trigger, the weapon bucking against his shoulder. His first shot ripped clean through the head of a ghoul, the skull exploding. The body dropped immediately. The blast was quickly followed by the others joining in the fray, 3 more shotguns adding their noise to the chaos. Bodies dropped rapidly as each man fired off every shell they had chambered in their weapon. The coordinated fire cut down zombie after zombie, creating a path through the mob. But the sheer number of creatures meant that despite their accuracy, they only managed to clear out most of the creatures blocking their path. A handful remained standing, shambling forward to fill the gaps left by fallen bodies. "Hold them off while I get the door," Foster ordered. The 3 other soldiers rushed forward, using the butts of their shotguns as bludgeons. The weapons came around in wide arcs, the solid stocks connecting with zombie heads. Skulls cracked, bodies fell. They worked fast, desperate to keep the path clear. Foster walked with purpose towards the front door, casually reloading his weapon. His hands moved automatically, pulling shells from his bag and sliding them into the tube. The familiar motion was calming, giving him something to focus on while his men fought. Hanson and Parker took on a group of 5 zombies clustered near the entrance. The sergeant kicked the lead creature back into the others, his boot planting firmly in its chest. The zombies stumbled backwards, colliding with the ones behind it. They went down in a domino effect, bodies tangling together on the pavement. The opening gave the 2 soldiers a chance to crack skulls, their weapons coming down hard. Both men delivered forceful strikes to the creatures on the ground, the shotgun stocks caving in heads. They kicked their feet to get the zombie hands away from them, boots stomping on grasping fingers. The creatures moaned and reached but couldn't gain purchase. Thomas rushed forward towards a trio of zombies, delivering a front kick to the lead one. His boot connected with enough force to send it falling backwards, the creature's legs giving out. It hit the ground in between 2 others, creating a gap. Thomas quickly grabbed a shell out of his bag, his fingers finding it by feel. He slapped it into his weapon and chambered it, the action smooth. He darted around the 2 ghouls still standing, his body moving past them before they could react. Thomas lined up his shot carefully, the barrel pointing at the fallen zombie's head. But he could see the one behind it, close enough that the slug might pass through. He fired at near point-blank range, the muzzle flash bright. The slug ripped through the head of the lead ghoul, the skull coming apart. The projectile kept going, flying straight into the head of the one behind it. Both zombies dropped simultaneously, a single shot taking down 2 targets. Thomas didn't take time to admire his trick shot, already moving. He stepped up and cracked the 3rd zombie in the forehead with the butt of his shotgun, the impact dropping it. Foster walked up to the front door, which was the automatic sliding door variety, 2 large panels of glass set in metal frames, the kind that parted in the middle when you approached. He planted his hands against the glass, his palms flat against the cool surface. Foster tried to pry them apart, his muscles straining. The doors resisted, refusing to budge. The deadbolt had been thrown, securing them from the inside. Someone had locked down the store, tried to keep the zombies out. Foster was undeterred by the obstacle. He raised his shotgun, pointing it at the lock mechanism visible through the glass. The weapon boomed, the slug punching through the lock and shattering it. He quickly pulled the doors open, the broken mechanism offering no resistance. The panels slid apart with a grinding sound. Foster stepped into the darkened store, his eyes struggling to adjust after the bright sunlight. He heard unnerving sounds coming from within, moans echoing through the aisles. The darkness was filled with movement, shapes shuffling in the shadows. "We're in. Hanson, Thomas, get that door secure. Parker, you're with me. We have work to do." Chapter 5. Captain Foster and Parker stopped by the front registers, each man reloading their hunting shotguns as fast as they could. Their hands moved automatically, pulling shells from bags and sliding them into the tubes. Behind them, they could hear Hanson and Thomas working to secure the entrance, the sounds of struggle and shouted commands mixing with zombie moans. "What's the play, Cap?" Parker asked. His voice was steady despite the circumstances, waiting for direction. Foster finished loading his last shell and racked one into the chamber, the metallic sound loud in the enclosed space. "You're sticking with me. I'll cover the front. You sweep each aisle as we go past it. Fire only if they're close to us. Runners are the priority. Everything else can wait," Foster said. "I'll call them out when I see them," Parker replied. Foster nodded as he loaded in the final shell, his fingers working the action and racking one before motioning for the private to follow. The two men moved quickly down the front aisle, their boots barely making sound on the polished concrete floor. The hardware store stretched out before them, rows of shelving creating a maze of shadows and hiding spots. They got a few yards away before the first zombie emerged from around a corner. The creature shambled into view, its arms raising as it spotted them. The thing had been an employee, the orange apron still hanging around its neck. Its face was pale, eyes dead and vacant. Foster didn't hesitate, pulling the trigger and removing the head from the creature without breaking stride. The shotgun boomed, the slug connecting with devastating effect. The zombie's head exploded, body dropping immediately. Foster moved right by the aisle it had emerged from, continuing to sweep forward. No time to stop, no time to confirm the kill. Keep moving, keep clearing. Parker aimed his weapon down the aisle as they passed it, his barrel sweeping the space. He spotted two more creatures within a few yards, both shambling between displays of power tools and hardware. They turned toward him, moaning. Parker paused briefly, his feet planting. He unloaded 2 quick shots to put the ghouls down, the reports echoing through the store. Foster kept them moving swiftly to the far end of the store, passing aisles of lumber and building materials. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, creating pools of shadow between the fluorescent fixtures. The store smelled of sawdust and chemicals, that distinctive hardware store scent mixed now with the stench of decay. They made the turn to head to the rear of the building, boots pivoting on the smooth floor. As Foster came around, he spotted a couple of creatures shambling towards them, excited by the noise. The gunshots had drawn them from wherever they had been lurking, pulled them toward the sound of the living. Foster got within a few yards of them before unloading on them. His first shot dropped one, the head coming apart. The second shot followed immediately, taking down its companion. 2 trigger pulls, 2 dead zombies. He paused for a brief moment, his hands already reaching for more shells. "Reload," Foster ordered. Both men worked quickly, fingers finding shells by feel and feeding them into their weapons. The familiar motion was calming, giving them a moment to catch their breath. Parker's hands were steady, no shake despite the adrenaline. "I only saw a few of them scattered down the aisles, none of them runners," Parker reported. The news was good, as good as they could hope for given the situation. A store full of shamblers was manageable. Runners would have made this impossible. "Good. We're going to push to the storeroom doors, sweep that area before coming back around to help them out at the front," Foster said. Parker nodded, racking in a shell before the duo kept moving. The back aisle was darker, farther from the emergency lighting. Their footsteps echoed off the walls, mixing with the distant moans from the front of the store. They rushed down the back aisle, weapons up and ready. A zombie emerged from between shelves, its body catching on a display. The creature pulled free, stumbling toward them. Foster took it down with a precise shot, not slowing his pace. Parker spotted another shambling from the opposite direction, its movements slow. He fired once, the slug connecting with its forehead and dropping it. They reached the storeroom doors, large metal panels marked with employee-only signs. The doors were closed, no way to see what waited on the other side. Foster positioned himself to one side, Parker on the other. The captain got confirmation from Parker with a nod that he was ready, and the two of them darted inside the darkened area. As they moved, the motion sensor lights clicked on. The fluorescent fixtures flickered to life, one by one, revealing a spacious room. Pallets of merchandise sat stacked in rows, creating corridors between them. Metal shelving units lined the walls, packed with inventory. The space was large, maybe half the size of the store itself. Thankfully, there was no movement, no moaning, no shuffling feet. Just the hum of the lights and their own breathing. They rushed through it anyway, taking no chances. Foster and Parker swept every hidden area between boxes, checking behind pallets and around corners. Their weapons stayed up, fingers on triggers. But after a thorough search, they found it clear, not a single zombie in the back room. Foster caught his breath for a moment, his chest heaving. He leaned against a pallet, taking the brief opportunity to reload his shotgun. Shells clicked into the tube, restoring his ammunition. Parker walked over to one of the bay doors on the far wall, looking through the crack to the loading dock outside. "Jesus Christ," Parker said. His tone made Foster's stomach drop. Nothing good ever followed those words said in that way. "What is it?" Foster asked. Parker let out a defeated sigh as he reached over and grabbed the chain dangling beside the bay door. The metal links clinked as he gripped them. He pulled on the chain just enough to lift the door up a few feet, maybe 2 feet of clearance. The bottom of the door rose, revealing the scene outside. It was more than enough to show the captain what they were dealing with. "Jesus Christ indeed," Foster said. He took a knee, getting low to look out to the back loading dock area. More curses fell from his lips as he spotted 100 zombies filling the space. The loading dock was packed with them, shoulder to shoulder in some places. They shambled across the concrete, weaving between delivery trucks and dumpsters. The creatures took notice of him immediately, moaning excitedly and reaching up for him. Arms extended toward the gap, hands grasping at nothing. The front row pressed against the door, their bodies creating pressure against the metal. "Close it up. We need to finish the sweep," Foster said. His tone was defeated, the reality of their situation sinking in. They were surrounded, every exit blocked by hordes of the undead. Parker did as instructed, releasing the chain. The door dropped back down with a bang, cutting off the reaching hands and desperate moans. He didn't say anything, recognizing the captain's tone and knowing when to stay quiet. At the front of the store, Hansen stood in the middle of the doorway, opening fire as quickly as his finger would allow. His shotgun boomed repeatedly, the muzzle flashed bright in the dim light. The slugs flew out into the parking lot, taking down a couple of creatures that were getting closer by the second. Bodies dropped on the pavement outside, creating obstacles, but more zombies simply walked over them, climbing over their fallen companions without hesitation. The horde was building, drawn by the noise and the scent of living humans trapped inside. As soon as Hansen stopped firing, his weapon clicking empty, Thomas stepped up. He grabbed onto the automatic doors, his hands finding purchase on the edges. Thomas pulled them closed, his muscles straining. The panels slid together, meeting in the middle. But despite his best effort to get them secure, the shotgun slug that had ripped through the locking mechanism made it impossible. The doors wanted to slide back open, the broken mechanism unable to hold them. "Forget that! Help me with the carts!" Hansen shouted. He pointed over to a row of shopping carts that were lined up a few yards to their left. The carts sat nested together, maybe 3 dozen of them forming a long metal snake. The sergeant ran hard to the far end of it, his boots pounding on the floor. Thomas got in position at the near end, understanding the plan immediately. Hansen let out a grunt as he began pushing, his muscles burning as he struggled to get the few dozen carts moving. The nested carts resisted at first, the weight substantial. His boots slipped slightly on the smooth floor, searching for traction. After a moment, however, they began moving, the wheels rolling in the same direction. Metal squeaked against metal as the carts shifted. Thomas made sure that the row of carts stayed off of the wall, guiding them toward the front entrance. He used his body to angle them, keeping the trajectory straight. The carts picked up momentum, rolling faster as Hansen continued pushing from behind. As the front edge of the carts rolled up to the door, a couple of zombies stepped through the threshold. They'd pushed the broken doors aside, stumbling into the store with arms raised. Thomas broke away from the carts, moving fast. He grabbed them by the arms and yanked them inside so they were out of the way, pulling them clear of the cart's path. The ghouls hit the ground hard, their bodies sprawling on the floor. The impact gave Thomas a brief moment to return to the carts, his hands finding the metal frame. He put his weight against them, his boots digging in. Thomas slowed the rolling mass down so that the center of them stopped in front of the door, creating a makeshift barricade between them and the horde outside. As the barrier was put into place, Hansen raised his shotgun. The sergeant put down both creatures on the ground in a matter of seconds, 2 quick shots ending their threat. He then turned his attention to the entrance, where the front edge of the mob began pushing against the carts. Hansen opened fire, obliterating the heads of the creatures on the front line of the horde. His shots were measured, each one dropping a zombie. Their lifeless corpses collapsed onto the line of carts, dead weight adding to the pressure. The carts began sliding on the floor as the mass of undead bodies on the other side continued to grow, the combined weight pushing the barricade backward. "Thomas!" Hansen shouted. The private didn't need further instructions. He could see what was happening, could feel the carts sliding. Thomas darted over to the middle of the line and dropped to the ground, his body hitting the floor hard. He put his back against the shopping carts, his legs extending and bracing against a support column. Thomas used his full weight against the barrier, doing his best to hold the line as the weight of the horde pressed against it. Despite his best efforts, the carts continued to skid against the floor. The smooth surface provided little friction, and the zombie mass kept building. However, Thomas kept the distance to a minimum, his muscles screaming as he held the mob at bay for the moment. Every inch he gave up was hard-fought, his boots finding purchase and pushing back. "How are we doing up here?" Foster called out. Hansen turned to see the captain and Parker running back from their sweep, boots moving fast. Parker broke away immediately, going to help his partner by the carts. He dropped down beside Thomas, adding his weight to the effort. The 2 privates braced together, their combined strength buying them precious seconds. "We managed to get the door blocked, but it's a temporary solution," Hansen said. Foster turned and pointed to the right side of the store, his finger indicating an aisle. "About 4 aisles down, they have a pallet of 5-gallon paint buckets. Roll that up here and get it set. That should buy us a little time," Foster ordered. Hansen nodded and ran off, his figure disappearing between the shelves. Foster pulled out his cell phone, the screen bright in the dim store. He quickly dialed up Mike, his thumb finding the number from memory. It rang for a brief moment before the DJ answered, his voice coming through the speaker. "You got Midnight Mike," the DJ said. His tone was upbeat, that radio personality voice, but it would change quickly. "Mike, it's Foster. We're in trouble," Foster said. There was no point in sugarcoating it. They needed help, and they needed it now. Mike went silent for a moment, the pause stretching out. When he finally spoke again, the radio voice was gone, replaced by concern. "Jesus, okay, what's the problem?" Mike asked. "We got overwhelmed at the exit point. We're trapped in the hardware store just across from the maintenance building," Foster explained. He kept his voice calm, stating facts. Panic wouldn't help anyone. Mike needed clear information to coordinate a response. "Are you safe at least?" Mike asked. Foster looked at the front entrance, at his 2 soldiers struggling to hold back a horde with a line of shopping carts. He could hear the moans from outside, the scrape of metal on concrete as the barricade slowly gave ground. "For the time being we are, but it's not going to be like that for very long," Foster said. "What can I do?" Mike asked. The DJ's voice carried the desperate need to help, to do something useful. Foster knew what he needed, knew it was a long shot, but had no other options. "If you have any fighters in the area, now would be a great time to give them a call," Foster said. "Hang in there, Captain. I'm on the case," Mike replied. The line went dead, the connection cutting off. Foster lowered the phone, staring at the screen for a moment before pocketing it. He looked to the 2 privates that were struggling to hold back the undead that was bearing down on them. Their faces were strained, muscles trembling from the constant pressure. Sweat ran down their faces despite the cool air in the store. This is going to take a miracle. Chapter 6. Sergeant Hansen rolled over another heavy pallet of paint in front of the shopping carts, the dolly wheels squeaking under the weight. He lowered it carefully so that it rested beside the other 4 he had brought over, the wooden platform settling with a thud. Each pallet held dozens of 5-gallon paint buckets, the combined weight creating a substantial barrier. The foursome of soldiers stared at their makeshift barricade of shopping carts and paint pallets, none of them feeling particularly confident. The structure looked solid enough, layers of metal and wood and liquid weight. But it was still just a temporary solution, buying them time rather than solving their problem. The horde of ghouls on the other side was massive, closer to 200 than 100. The parking lot had filled with them, drawn by the gunfire. All of them were trying to squeeze through the narrow entrance of the hardware store, bodies pressing against the doors and the carts beyond. The soldiers focused on the barricade, watching it slide ever so slightly under the weight. Inch by inch, the barrier gave ground. "It isn't going to hold forever, but we have some time," Hansen said. His tone carried resignation. They had bought themselves breathing room, but the clock was ticking. Thomas shifted his weight, his frustration evident. "Time to do what?" Thomas asked. Hansen looked at him, the answer obvious even if unsatisfying. "Figure a way out of here," Hansen replied. Thomas gestured toward the back of the store, toward the loading dock they'd discovered earlier. His voice carried the edge of desperation, the need to do something rather than wait. "I still say we fight our way out of the back. We have the high ground on those things," Thomas said. Parker shook his head, having already run through that scenario in his mind. The math didn't work, not with the numbers they'd seen. "And as soon as we start putting them down, all we'll do is attract more of them back there," Parker replied. "And even if we get out that way, we'll still be on foot," Hansen said. Thomas wanted to respond, his mouth opening to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, he fell into muttering curses to himself, his anger directed at the situation more than his fellow soldiers. They were trapped, and everyone knew it. It took a moment for Hansen to notice that Foster was seemingly deep in thought. The captain stood apart from the group, his eyes distant. His jaw worked slightly, like he was running calculations or considering options. But his expression was troubled, lacking the confidence they usually saw when he was planning. "Foster, do you want to chime in here?" Hansen asked. The captain continued thinking for a moment, not hearing the question at first. Then he blinked, breaking out of his trance. Foster looked at his men, seeing the expectation in their faces. "I say we sit here a little longer, see if Mike can find some people to help us out," Foster said. The suggestion landed like a stone, unexpected and unwelcome. Thomas stared at his captain, disbelief written across his face. "Really, Cap? You just want to sit tight and do nothing?" Thomas asked. His tone bordered on insubordination, shock overriding military courtesy. Foster had always been the one pushing forward, finding solutions, leading from the front. This passive approach didn't fit. Foster met his gaze, his expression serious. He understood the reaction, but stood by his assessment. "I know it doesn't sound like me, Thomas, but we've burned through a ton of ammo already, and we don't have enough to fight our way out," Foster explained. The admission was hard to make. They'd been shooting since the maintenance building, putting down zombies at every turn. The constant fighting had depleted their shells faster than anticipated. Thomas was left speechless, stammering for a moment before falling silent. The reality of their ammunition situation killed any argument he might have made. Parker, however, was anything but silent as he spoke up excitedly. His eyes had gone wide, an idea clearly forming. "Holy shit! The solution has been staring us in the face this whole time," Parker said. Hansen turned to look at him, confusion mixing with hope. The private sounded energized, like he'd just solved an impossible problem. "What are you talking about, Parker?" Hansen asked. Parker gestured around them, his arm sweeping to encompass the store. His expression showed the frustration of someone who couldn't believe the others didn't see it. "Look around, Sarge. We're in a hardware store," Parker said. Hansen's expression remained flat, not following the logic. His tone carried a hint of annoyance. "I'm aware of that, Parker," Hansen replied. The private shook his head in frustration before continuing, the words tumbling out quickly. "We have everything we need right here to take down those things. We have building material, weapons. We just have to get creative," Parker explained. The other three soldiers contemplated for a moment, their minds working through the implications. The realization began dawning on them as well, understanding spreading across their faces. They weren't trapped in a hardware store. They were trapped in a hardware store, surrounded by tools and materials and possibilities. Foster got a big smile on his face, the expression transforming him. The defeat from moments ago vanished, replaced by the confidence they knew. The inspiration that had taken root in Parker had grabbed him as well. "Parker, you're a damn genius," Foster said. "Oh, now I know we're in trouble," Hansen said. "This place still has power. Parker, head over to Tools and find every battery-powered chainsaw you can and get them charging," Foster said. Parker nodded, already turning to head deeper into the store, but he paused, adding his own thought to the plan. I'll get some saws and drills charging too, because I get the sense we're going to have to build something, Parker said. So, what exactly are we building, Cap? Hanson asked. Foster began pacing back and forth near the shopping carts, as if he was designing something in his mind. His eyes moved across the space, measuring distances and evaluating structural points. He walked over a few yards to the checkout lines, approaching the heavy-duty counters that anchored the register stations. Foster grabbed onto the counters and gave them a shake, testing their stability. He put his full weight behind the movement, pushing and pulling with significant force. Despite his effort, the counters didn't budge. They were bolted to the floor, solid and immovable, perfect anchors for what he had in mind. We're going to build a funnel system from the front doors to over here. Wooden walls chest high over to these two checkout lines, Foster said. He walked around, using exaggerated arm gestures to highlight what he was envisioning. His hands traced invisible walls through the air, mapping the construction in 3 dimensions. The others watched, trying to follow his vision. We create some holding pens here in between the registers, get them in here nice and tight, Foster continued. And then what? Thomas asked. Foster's grin widened, the expression almost predatory. We put those chainsaws to good use, Foster said. Thomas and Hanson exchanged a concerning look, their eyes meeting for a long moment. Both of them were letting out defeated sighs, shoulders dropping. The plan was insane, dangerous, and likely to result in them being covered in zombie remains. But they both knew that this was the best idea they had. No ammunition meant getting creative, and this qualified. What do you think, Sarge? Thomas asked. Hanson rubbed his face, already resigned to what was coming. I'm thinking I'm going over to the paint section and grabbing a small enough tarp I can turn into a poncho. It's one thing to crack these things over the head with something heavy, but using chainsaws is going to get messy, Hanson said. See if they have one in my size too, Thomas said. Hanson nodded as he wandered off toward the paint section, his boots carrying him down an aisle. Foster got a grin on his face, energy returning to his movements. He pointed to Thomas and motioned for him to follow. All right, Thomas, you're with me. Let's start building some defenses, Foster said. The 4 soldiers worked tirelessly over the next couple of hours building their contraption. The hardware store became a construction site, filled with the sounds of drills and saws and hammering. They used multiple layers of plywood, the sheets heavy and awkward to maneuver. Each wall was reinforced with every kind of beam they could find, be it wooden or metal. 2x4s, 4x4s, metal studs, anything that would add strength. The structure took shape gradually, rising from the floor in sections. They built the frame first, establishing the skeleton, then added the plywood sheathing, screwing it in place with hundreds of fasteners. Additional bracing went in at angles, triangulating the forces. Every joint was reinforced, every connection doubled. The finished structure stood 5 feet tall, roughly chest high on an average-sized person. It ran 10 yards from the front entrance to the checkout lines, creating a corridor of wood and metal. Rather than go all the way to the doors, they positioned one wall against the line of shopping carts at the point where it would be pushed back to. The other side extended to the front wall of the store, creating an angled funnel. The geometry was deliberate, designed to channel zombies from the wide entrance into an increasingly narrow space. The walls would contain them, prevent them from spreading out or flanking, force them into the kill zones where the chainsaws waited. The 4 of them stood there staring at their handiwork after putting the finishing touches on it. Sweat ran down their faces, their hands aching from hours of construction work. But the structure was solid, professional-looking, despite the rushed timeline. Hanson stepped over to the wall, gripping the top edge. He grabbed onto it and wiggled it back and forth, with as much force as he could muster, testing the joints and connections. Nothing moved. The wall stood firm, absorbing his efforts without flex or give. Hanson got a big smile on his face, satisfied with their work. I don't know if this is going to work, but it's definitely solid, Hanson said. Foster turned toward Parker, moving to the next checklist item. Parker, how are we looking on weapons? Foster asked. The private had been working on that aspect while the others built, setting up their killing stations. He'd charged batteries, positioned equipment, created redundancy. There are 4 kill zones on each side of the wall, 2 close to the entrance, one near the checkout line and one at the checkout line. Each station has 2 chainsaws and spare batteries for both, Parker reported. Thomas looked at the stations, seeing the doubled equipment. The logic escaped him. "What the hell do we need 2 chainsaws for?" Thomas asked. Parker's expression suggested the answer should be obvious, but he explained anyway. "These things are built to cut wood, not flesh and bone. While I think they can handle it, there's a chance it's going to get gunked up by zombie goo," Parker said. Thomas grimaced at the mental image, his face twisting. "That's an appetizing thought," Thomas said. "What about if things go bad?" "Do we have a fallback position?" Hansen asked. Thomas nodded, having anticipated that concern. He'd spent part of his time preparing for failure. "I got some defenses set up down the center aisle there, but hopefully we won't need them," Thomas said. The group fell silent for a moment. The only sound permeating through the air was that of zombie moans. The creatures outside had never stopped, their voices constant and hungry. The barrier still held, but barely. Time was running out. After a moment, Foster broke the silence. His voice carried finality, the tone of a man committing to action. "All right, Hansen, Thomas, you get on the other side. Parker and I will handle moving the carts. Let's get this done." Chapter 7. Hansen and Thomas stood on the far side of the barricade at the front 2 positions, both men with a chainsaw in their hands. The tools felt heavy, designed for cutting lumber, not fighting zombies. But they'd work. They had to work. The soldiers had tested the starter pulls, made sure the chains were properly tensioned. Everything was ready. Foster and Parker stood by the row of shopping carts, looking out to the horde of ghouls pressed against them. The mass of bodies had grown while they built, drawn by the construction noise and the knowledge that living humans were inside. The creatures thrashed about, excited to have fresh meat within view. Arms reached through gaps in the carts, grasping at nothing. The metal carts rattled around as they moved, creating a constant percussion. But the barricade didn't give way, the paint pallets holding firm under the pressure. "All right, Parker, we're going to roll this thing back a few feet and pull it towards us so it makes an opening just large enough for a couple of them to squeeze through at a time," Foster said. His voice was calm, laying out the plan one more time. Control the flow, manage the numbers. Let too many through and they'd be overwhelmed. Parker nodded, understanding his role. "You just tell me where you need me, Cap," Parker replied. Foster nodded before turning to the others, making sure everyone was in position. "You boys ready over there?" Foster called out. Hansen held up his hand for a moment, as if he suddenly remembered something. The gesture made Foster pause, wondering what the sergeant had forgotten. Hansen ducked down behind the barricade, disappearing from view for a moment. He emerged a moment later with a clear painter's tarp that he'd cut a few holes through. It took a moment for him to work his hands through the opening, the plastic crinkling as he adjusted it. The makeshift poncho settled over his shoulders and torso, providing a layer between him and what was coming. Once he had it situated, Hansen gave the captain a big smile and a thumbs up, ready to proceed. Foster let out a sigh, shaking his head at the sight. Hansen looked ridiculous, like a kid playing in the rain. But the logic was sound, even if the execution was absurd. The sergeant would thank himself later when he wasn't scrubbing zombie remains out of every crevice. Foster motioned for Parker to grab onto the carts. "All right, let's get this shit show underway," Foster said. The 2 men grabbed onto the rolling barricade, their hands finding purchase on the metal frames. They pulled with everything they could muster, muscles straining against the weight. The carts resisted at first, the paint pallets adding friction. But slowly they began rolling, wheels turning reluctantly. It took a few moments for them to get the carts far enough back so that they were nearly clear of the wooden structure they had built up. The gap opened, creating a space between the shopping carts and their funnel walls. Daylight streamed through, illuminating the interior of the store. Within seconds of creating the opening, the first few zombies squeezed through. The creatures pushed past each other, driven by hunger and the sight of living humans just yards away. Hansen and Thomas immediately began yelling, their voices loud and aggressive. They needed to draw the zombies' attention, pull them into the funnel rather than letting them focus on the captain and Parker. "Hey, we're over here, assholes!" Hansen shouted. Thomas joined in, his voice carrying across the space. "We have specials on chainsaws today. Why don't you come check it out?" Thomas called. The first few creatures locked onto them immediately. Dead eyes fixing on the sources of sound, they let out excited moans as they began shambling in their direction, arms raising and reaching. Their feet shuffled across the floor, moving down the funnel created by the wooden walls. The geometry worked exactly as planned, channeling them into a narrow corridor. It only took a few seconds for the first one to reach Hansen. The sergeant gripped his chainsaw, pulling the starter cord. The engine roared to life, the blade spinning up to speed. He gave it a few revs, the sound echoing through the store. "Oh yeah, here we go," Hansen said. His voice carried excitement mixed with dread. This was going to be awful, but there was no turning back now. Hansen extended his weapon, putting the center of the saw against the neck of the lead ghoul. The zombie reached for him, oblivious to the danger. As soon as Hansen pulled the trigger, the teeth of the blade spun up faster, cutting through the decaying tissue with ease. Blood spurted everywhere, the pressure from the zombie's circulatory system still present even in death. The arterial spray hit everything. Onto the passing creatures shuffling behind the first one, onto the wooden barricade, onto the floor. But most of all, right back onto Hansen. The blood soaked through his plastic poncho, warm and thick. The sergeant let out a satisfied yell as he cut clean through the neck of the creature, the head separating from the body. He didn't have to wait long for the next one to get within striking distance. The funnel kept them coming, a steady stream of targets. Hansen hit the trigger again, extending the blade and slicing it into the side of the next creature's head. The saw bit deep, punching through skull and into brain matter. The zombie dropped instantly. As Hansen worked his position, the other 3 soldiers had their chainsaws going, the store filled with the roar of engines and the wet sound of blades cutting into flesh. Thomas worked his station with brutal efficiency, the chainsaw coming across at head height and removing chunks of skull. Parker and Foster maintained their positions near the carts, dealing with any zombies that got past the first line. They cut into zombies as they continued pouring in through the entrance, the horde seemingly endless. Bodies began piling up, creating obstacles that the living zombies had to climb over. Blood pooled on the floor, making the surface slick. In a matter of minutes, 20 zombies were on the ground. Some were missing parts of their skull, brains exposed and destroyed. Others had their heads completely removed from their bodies, the decapitated corpses lying in growing puddles. The powerful sounds of chainsaws was slowly being replaced by a different noise, the chains getting bogged down with the gore. The blades were designed for clean wood, not flesh and bone and thick fluids. The biological matter jammed them up, gunking the mechanisms and slowing the chains. Foster felt his saw struggling, the engine straining. Then it locked up entirely, the chain refusing to turn. He killed the engine and tossed it to the ground, the tool clattering on the bloody floor. Foster reached down and grabbed a fresh one, his hands finding the backup weapon Parker had positioned. As he stood up, pulling the starter cord, he saw that the horde was filling up their entire holding pen. The zombies packed in tight, pressed against each other and the back wall. The mass was beginning to generate enough force against the backstop to cause it to make unsettling noises. Wood creaked and groaned, nails pulling against lumber as if they were being ripped from the supports. "Parker, we have trouble!" Foster shouted. He yelled loud enough for the private to hear, over the chainsaw engines and zombie moans. The captain sprinted over to the checkout line, his boots slipping slightly on the blood-slicked floor. Foster jumped up onto the counter, pulling himself up to the elevated position. As soon as he landed, several arms reached out for him from below. The zombies pressed against the counter, hands grasping upward. Foster cut across the line with his weapon, trigger held down. The saw moved horizontally, the blade passing through the reaching arms. The chainsaw rattled as it cut through several bones, severing limbs with relative ease. Hands and forearms dropped to the floor, still twitching. As soon as that was done, Foster began striking the heads of the creatures below, cutting into the brains one at a time. He worked methodically, each strike deliberate and lethal. The blade punched through skulls, destroying the motor functions that kept the zombies moving. However, as he struck down zombie after zombie, the horde continued to press against the back wall. More zombies tried to get into the store, adding to the mass. The pressure built, the crowd crushing forward. As Foster took down another creature, he heard the back support crack. The sound was sharp and loud even over the chainsaws, wood splintering under stress. A portion of the wall fell down, the structure failing. Boards hit the floor with crashes, creating an opening in their carefully constructed funnel. "Jesus Christ," Foster said. He looked back to call out to Parker, needing the private to help contain the breach. But Parker was nowhere to be seen, his position by the carts abandoned. The captain muttered curses under his breath before cutting up another zombie that was reaching out for him from below. Where the hell had Parker gone? Foster's first instinct was to jump down and retreat, fall back to the secondary defenses. But the zombies were pouring out through the opening into the store, spilling past their containment. The funnel had failed, and now they were flooding into the aisles. In seconds, they'd be surrounded, cut off from each other. Before Foster could make a decision, however, he spotted Parker coming out from the center aisle. The private was pushing a shopping cart, moving fast. The cart rattled and shook, something attached to it creating noise and movement. "I'm over here, assholes!" Parker shouted. His voice drew zombie attention immediately, heads turning toward the new target. Parker reached down and grabbed a thin chain attached to the cart's handle, pulling it towards him. The motion activated something, a mechanical sound building. The other end of the chain was connected to half a dozen chainsaws that Parker had attached to the front and sides of the shopping cart. The arrangement was devilish, blades positioned at different heights and angles. As Parker pulled the activation chain, the starter cords engaged simultaneously. As each blade got up to speed, the cart transformed into a mobile killing machine. The chainsaws roared, 6 engines creating a wall of sound. Parker let out a forceful yell and took off running towards the front edge of the horde near the breach. He picked up speed, his legs pumping hard. The cart rolled ahead of him, gaining momentum. Parker slammed into the creatures at full speed, the impact solid. The front chainsaws punched through the zombies' midsections, cutting through flesh and bone with ease. The blades were positioned at waist height, creating a horizontal cutting plane that bisected the creatures. Parker began yanking the cart from side to side, using his body weight to change direction. The motion swept the blades through multiple targets, the front saws cutting the creatures in half, while the side saws cut into legs of other zombies. Bodies fell in pieces, the upper and lower halves separating. It took a few moments of brutal work for Parker to rip the front edge of the horde into shreds. He wasn't landing kill shots, the chainsaws hitting bodies rather than heads. But he was managing to disable them, taking away their mobility so that they weren't much of a threat. Legless zombies could only crawl, and crawling zombies were easy to avoid. As Parker kept pushing forward into the opening, where the portion of the barricade had fallen, Foster opened fire from his elevated position. The captain had set down his chainsaw and grabbed his shotgun, the weapon ready in his hands. He aimed carefully, tracking targets on the ground. Foster sent several slugs into zombies that were on the ground, wanting to make sure that they didn't crawl after Parker. The private got the shopping cart into place, wedging it into the breach. The blades continued ripping through any creature that got close to it, creating a new barrier. Blood splattered everywhere, coating every surface as more and more creatures fell, victim to his devilish contraption. The cart held position, the chainsaws creating a zone of death that the zombies mindlessly walked into. The soldiers continued cutting down, zombie after zombie, managing to whittle them down. The horde that had seemed endless was finally thinning, bodies piling higher than the living ones standing. Eventually, they were down to just a handful of zombies trapped in the middle of the holding pen, continually getting tripped up on their fallen companions. The creatures stumbled and fell, unable to navigate the obstacle course of corpses. Foster looked over to the front door, his attention drawn by movement. He was confused when he saw half a dozen zombies shambling back out of it instead of coming towards them. The creatures were leaving, walking away from easy prey. That made no sense. Zombies didn't retreat, didn't lose interest. "What in the hell?" Foster said. He motioned for the others to turn off their chainsaws, pointing to the door. They did as instructed, killing the engines. The sudden silence was jarring after the constant noise. They watched in confusion as the creatures walked back outside, their bodies disappearing into the parking lot. "Are we not that interesting anymore?" Hansen asked. His tone was bewildered, trying to make sense of zombie behavior that defied everything they had learned. Foster held up his hand, getting the sergeant to stop talking for a moment. He listened intently, his head tilted slightly. There was sound from outside, something beyond the moaning. Music, faint but growing louder. Heavy metal being played from the parking lot. The aggressive guitars and pounding drums unmistakable. Foster got a relieved smile on his face as understanding dawned. He turned back to the others. "It looks like Mike came through with some backup. Parker, Thomas, finish those guys off. Sarge, you're on me," Foster ordered. The soldiers did as instructed, Parker and Thomas moving to put down the remaining zombies in the pen. The sergeant ran around the defensive barricade to reach the captain, his plastic poncho crackling as he moved. Once there, the duo strolled up to the front door. Blood dripped off of them from their violent confrontation, leaving a trail across the floor. They looked like they'd bathed in gore, every surface coated. The music continued to get louder as they approached, fast-paced speed metal. The tempo was aggressive, all blast beats and shredding guitars. They were half expecting a mosh pit to have formed outside, some kind of makeshift concert. But what they found was even more shocking. Both men stood in the doorway, mouths hanging open in disbelief. There were a dozen creatures in the parking lot, the remnants of the horde that had surrounded the store. But instead of pressing against the building, they were converging on a trio of men dressed as gladiators. The three fighters were wearing ornate outfits. Gold leaf highlighted the garb, catching the afternoon sun. Leather and metal pieces created the illusion of ancient armor. Each man stood over 6 feet tall, muscles toned and gleaming as they fought against the creatures. They moved with coordination and skill, weapons flashing. "What in God's name is going on, Cap?" Chapter 8. Hanson and Foster stood in the entrance of the hardware store, staring out into the parking lot where the strangest scene they'd ever witnessed was unfolding. After days of fighting zombies, of watching civilization collapse, of seeing horrors they'd never imagined, somehow 3 men dressed as ancient Roman warriors fighting the undead to heavy metal music topped the list. 3 gladiators were laying waste to a small mob of zombies as a speed metal song blared from a nearby boombox positioned on the hood of a car. 2 gladiators wielded short swords and shields, each man using both implements effectively. Their movements were fluid and practiced, the result of years performing choreographed combat. But this wasn't choreography. The strikes landed with real force, the blades sharp and lethal. One man rushed towards a trio of zombies, his stride confident. He closed the distance fast, stabbing his sword into the face of one creature. The blade punched through the eye socket and into the brain, dropping the zombie to the ground instantly. He thrust his shield forward without pause, the movement continuing his momentum. The outer edge of the shield cracked into the forehead of the next ghoul, the impact crushing the skull. Bone fractured and the zombie dropped, its brain destroyed by blunt force. The warrior's technique was perfect, using every part of his equipment as a weapon. In a fluid motion, he ducked down, avoiding being grabbed by the third zombie. The creature's arm swept over his head, grasping at air. The gladiator reached back and grabbed his sword, yanking it free from the corpse on the ground. The blade came loose with a wet sound, brain matter clinging to the metal. He bounced up, his legs driving him upward. The gladiator jammed the sword into the base of the third creature's skull, the point entering at the spine and driving up into the brainstem. The other sword-wielding gladiator was just as effective, putting down a couple of creatures with ease. His style was different, more aggressive. He used his shield to bash and create openings, then followed with precise sword strikes to the head. Each kill was efficient, no wasted movement or unnecessary flourishes. These weren't actors playing at being warriors. They were the real thing. The last of the trio was a few inches taller than the others, his frame more massive. He stood at least 6.5 feet, built like a linebacker. He used a shield, but opted for an ornate one-handed sledgehammer as his killing instrument. The weapon looked ceremonial, decorative scrollwork covering the handle, but the head was solid metal, weighted for impact. The big gladiator swung the hammer, hitting a creature in the side of the head with enough force that it nearly ripped the skull free from its shoulders. The zombie's neck twisted at an unnatural angle, vertebrae shattering. The head hung by threads of tissue, the body dropping. Rather than regroup, the warrior used his momentum to spin around. His body rotated, the hammer coming around in a wide arc. He delivered another strike to the next ghoul in his path, the weapon connecting with the temple. The skull caved in completely, the zombie falling. In less than a minute, the trio of gladiators eliminated every creature left in the parking lot. They stood there proudly as the song hit its crescendo, guitars screaming and drums pounding. Their weapons were raised, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. The image was surreal, like something from a movie poster. Ancient warriors in a modern apocalypse. Once the song finished, one man casually walked over to the boombox. He hit stop, the music cutting off abruptly. The sudden silence was jarring after the constant noise. The gladiators began walking towards the entrance, their stride confident and unhurried. Blood dripped from their weapons, leaving trails across the pavement. The two soldiers in the doorway stood there in silence, still not sure of what to make of the situation. Foster's brain was trying to process what he'd just witnessed, categorize it somehow. But there was no frame of reference for gladiators fighting zombies to heavy metal. The apocalypse had officially gotten weird. As they stood there, Privates Parker and Thomas joined them. The two younger soldiers had finished putting down the remaining zombies in the holding pen and came to investigate what had drawn their leaders to the door. They were also unsure of what they were witnessing, their expressions matching the confusion on Foster and Hansen's faces. After several moments, the trio reached the doors. The big hammer-wielding gladiator stepped forward, clearly the leader of the group. He was imposing up close, muscle definition visible even under the costume. His presence commanded attention. "My name is Magnus. These are my fellow warriors Aldrich and Cade. I presume that you are Captain Foster?" Magnus asked. His voice was deep and carried a theatrical quality, like he was performing for an audience. Foster stood there for a moment, his brain struggling to make sense of things. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, started again, stopped. He stammered for a moment before speaking. "Sergeant, my brain hurts." "I'm going to let you talk now," Foster said. The gladiators shifted their gaze slightly to the side, looking at Hansen. The sergeant took a breath, trying to find the right words for this bizarre situation. "Gentlemen, first off, thank you for coming to our aid. Secondly, and please don't take offense to this, but what the hell, man? Is a zombie apocalypse not weird enough for you already?" Hansen asked. His tone was genuinely curious rather than mocking. Magnus got a slight smile on his face as he spoke, clearly having gotten this question before. "This is how the apocalypse found us, and it has served us well up to this point. So, we have no intention of changing," Magnus said. Hansen's eyebrows raised, trying to parse that statement. He couldn't quite wrap his head around it. "You were gladiators when the apocalypse began? I know Vegas is weird, but I find it hard to believe that 3 men dressed for a war from 1,000 years ago were just wandering the streets," Hansen said. Aldrich, one of the sword wielders, shook his head. His tone was matter of fact. "We weren't wandering the streets," Aldrich said. Cade, the other sword wielder, dropped the theatrical act. He spoke normally, his voice carrying a California accent. The shift from gladiator persona to regular guy was jarring. "Yeah, man, we work at this dinner theater type place just up the road. It's gladiator themed," Cade explained. He gestured vaguely in a direction, indicating the restaurant's location. His casual tone made the whole thing sound perfectly normal. "You come in, get a meal, and watch some big dudes have a gladiator battle in front of you," Cade continued. The soldiers looked around at each other, shrugging at the explanation. That actually made sense, in a Vegas sort of way. Of course, there was a gladiator dinner theater. This city had everything. Aldrich added his own endorsement, his voice carrying enthusiasm. "There's a prime rib deal on Thursdays that isn't half bad," Aldrich said. Hansen processed the information, his confusion giving way to understanding, but questions remained. "So you've been fighting zombies as gladiators this whole time?" Hansen asked. Magnus nodded, his expression suggesting the answer should be obvious. "Why not? We've been at this place for years, using these weapons night in and night out," Magnus said. Aldrich gestured to his sword, the blade still coated with dark blood. "We just had to put a sharper edge on them to get them battle-ready, but that was easy enough," Aldrich explained. Cade's expression showed satisfaction, like he'd found his calling. His voice carried excitement. "Besides, this is the best role any of us have ever had." "Back in Los Angeles, we were faceless stuntmen," Cade said. Magnus straightened, his chest puffing out slightly with pride. His voice deepened, taking on that theatrical quality again. "But out here, we're warriors," Magnus declared. Foster let out a sigh, nodding his head. The explanation was weird, but no weirder than anything else that had happened. And results mattered more than methods. These men had saved their lives, costume or not. You know what? I'm down with it. You risked your lives to come help us, and if running around as gladiators makes you happy, have at it, Foster said. He looked past them for a moment, scanning the parking lot. The area was clear, no more zombies visible. Bodies littered the pavement, but nothing moved. Foster motioned for the gladiators to come inside, stepping back to make room. "Why don't you come inside? We're going to give Mike a call," Foster said. Magnus nodded, accepting the invitation. "We'd be happy to, Captain," Magnus replied. The soldiers parted so that the three gladiators could walk through into the store. The trio looked at the carnage filling the entrance area, taking in the scene. Bodies were stacked in piles, blood coating every surface. The chainsaw stations still had their weapons positioned, and Parker's shopping cart contraption sat wedged in the broken section of wall. They nodded approvingly, recognizing skilled work. "This is quite the setup, Captain," Aldrich said. Foster glanced at the destruction they had created, the desperate plan that had worked, pride mixed with exhaustion. "Well, we didn't know if help was coming, so we figured something out," Foster said. Cade examined the shopping cart more closely, his expression showing professional interest. The design was innovative, brutal, but effective. "We'll have to remember this the next time we're stuck somewhere," Cade said. Foster turned to his two privates, getting them positioned for security. "Parker, Thomas, keep watch at the door," Foster ordered. The two privates nodded and got into position, turning to face the parking lot. Their weapons were ready, watching for any zombies that might wander back. Hansen and Foster walked over to the counter, stepping around pools of blood. The captain pulled out the cell phone, his thumb finding Mike's number. He clicked it before hitting the speaker function, setting the phone on the counter. "You got Midnight Mike. What's on your mind?" Mike's voice came through. His radio personality was in full effect, the cheerful greeting almost absurd given the circumstances. Foster couldn't help but smile slightly. "Mike, it's Foster," the captain said. The relief in Mike's response was immediate and genuine. "Hey, Captain, did my helpers show up?" Mike asked. Magnus stepped closer to the phone, his voice carrying across the space. "We're here, Mike," Magnus said. Mike's enthusiasm came through the speaker clearly, his voice brightening. "Magnus, my man." "Captain, what do you think?" Mike asked. Foster looked at the three gladiators, taking in their bloody weapons and theatrical costumes. He thought about how they'd scattered the horde, saved his men's lives without hesitation. The strangeness didn't matter. "I think you did good, Mike." "There's some badasses who rolled in and helped save the day," Foster said. Mike's pleasure was evident in his tone, clearly proud of making the connection. "Well, if you think I did good with that, just wait until you hear this." "I found you a helicopter pilot," Mike said. Foster's expression shifted immediately, his eyes widening. This was exactly what they needed, the missing piece to Amanda's party bus plan. "This day keeps getting better and better," Foster said. Mike's tone shifted slightly, becoming more serious. There was a complication coming. Foster could hear it. "He's a few miles from here, trapped in his house," Mike explained. Foster waited for the other shoe to drop, knowing there had to be more to it. "And from what he's told me, there's quite the crowd in his neighborhood," Mike continued. "Of course there was. Nothing was ever simple, but a helicopter pilot was too valuable to pass up, worth the risk of extraction." "Thanks, Mike. Text me the address and we'll figure it out," Foster said. Mike's response was immediate, helpful. "Okay, just let me know what the plan is. I have a few traffic cameras I can check. Just let me know if you're coming here first or going after him," Mike said. Foster went silent for a moment, thinking. They needed to get supplies to Mike, but they also needed that pilot. The question was priority and resources. Finally, he spoke back up. "Mike, let me get back to you in just a minute," Foster said. Mike's easy acceptance came through the phone. "I'm not going anywhere," Mike replied. Foster reached down and hung up the call before looking over to the gladiators. An idea was forming, one that would solve multiple problems at once. "Magnus, please feel free to say no to this, but would you three mind going and grabbing that pilot for us?" Foster asked. Hansen turned to look at his captain, surprise evident on his face. "Captain, are you sure?" Hansen asked. Magnus's expression shifted, something like offense crossing his features. His voice carried challenge. Are you doubting our ability? Magnus asked. Hansen quickly raised his hands, trying to clarify. Not at all, Hansen started. He trailed off for a moment, searching for the right words. How to explain without insulting them. I just know helicopter pilots are in short supply, Hansen finished. Magnus's expression softened, understanding the concern. His voice carried confidence that bordered on arrogance. Well, it's a good thing your boss just asked the best warriors in this town to go get 'em, Magnus said. Hansen took a beat, processing the statement. Then he nodded in agreement. You're right, we are lucky. Thank you, Hansen said. Magnus inclined his head, accepting the gratitude. Of course. Captain, my men and I will rescue your pilot and take him to the Colosseum, Magnus said. Foster looked at Magnus in confusion, the word not fitting. Cade spoke up again, dropping back into his normal voice to clarify. It's the restaurant. I'll give you the address before we leave, Cade explained. All right, if you can get him there, we'll get food over to Mike so he doesn't starve to death, Foster said. Magnus straightened to his full height, accepting the mission. We will take care of it, Captain, Magnus said. Foster nodded as he looked around to everyone, gladiator and soldier alike. The group was strange, cobbled together from circumstance, but they were effective, and that was what mattered. All right, gentlemen, let's get to work. The end.